Good evening, Chief. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hey, Chief.
Hello.
Yeah. All right.
Looking kind of dark where you are, Carol.
Yeah. I put a little light on, but it's kind of blinding if it's too bright. I don't have a desk anymore. I need a desk.
If we're all ready to go, I can go ahead and take the roll call.
Okay.
All right. Vice Chair Carol Collins running the meeting.
Yes, here.
Joe Davis.
Here?
And I believe Sriram is off, correct, Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
All right. Committee member Steve Miller
Present.
and committee member Tom Owen.
Here.
All right, Carol, it's on to you.
Okay, well, should we do the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure.
Okay. I pledge allegiance
To
to the flag, the United States of America, the Republic for
To the republic which is stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible, with
Indivisible,
liberty
liberty, and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. And if anybody, running a meeting, I've only done, I guess I've done it once before, but let me know if I'm missing something. Public comments. Do we have anybody with public comments? In fact, I don't see the chief, but that's him,
I'm the 425 number.
yeah, okay, so we don't have any public comments, it doesn't look like. Moving on to the regular agenda, there is none. Approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any changes or comments about the minutes from last September 8th? We have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Second?
Steve Miller raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, Steve. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Moving on to old business. Looks like that's yours, Robert.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Collins. Appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the Neighborhood Traffic Management Action Plan. It has come to you before under a different title, and it was this is going to be a presentation on the outreach phase that we recently concluded. And we do appreciate your participation as we were developing the online survey. And I know that several of you attended the workshops. And so I wanted to say thank you for that. And I am going to share my screen so I can give a presentation. So hold on just a second. I'm going to see if I can't get this.
Hey, Robert, while you're doing that, this is Mike Lempress on the phone. I'll be on my computer in a little bit, but right now I'm on the phone.
Good.
Okay. Okay, I'm hoping you all see a slide deck.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so as you know, we had two public listening sessions, and there were approximately 14 attendees at each session that were excluding city staff, council, and our consultants. But as you know, we developed a project website, and we had about 515 unique visitors to the site. 291 online survey responses, which is pretty good, and then 138 responsive via the interactive map. And so in terms of the demographics of folks that participated in the survey, the greater majority were folks that live here in Atherton. They describe themselves, we have 41% of the folks as residents but don't commute to work. And then we had others that, commuted to work or worked in Atherton. We had a small minority of folks that listed themselves as other in both this as well as in the neighborhoods that we asked people to indicate where they're from. And most of those actually were visitors, either living on the border of Atherton or coming into Atherton from outside. So not many responses, which is good for us because it makes it easier for us to identify our residents and know that we're responding to our residents when we look at the data that we're getting. I just want to say, as you can see, that most of though 30% of the folks were from the area north of Atherton Avenue, there's a good representation of the different groups and different areas within town. Looking at, the modes of transportation that folks use, about 83% of the folks that responded to the online survey indicated that they drove 3 or more times a week. 64% indicated that they walked three or more times a week in the neighborhood, and 17% indicated that they ride a bike 3 or more times a week. So that's actually not pretty bad. That's a pretty good cross-section of modes of transportation. And so as we move on, when we look at areas of concern, this again is just from the online survey responses. It indicates that, there's some concern over at Selby at Stockbridge, which was most commonly referenced in the online survey. But the other major routes in town, ECR, Alameda de las Pulgas, Atherton Avenue, Middlefield Road, Selby, et cetera, were all mentioned quite a bit. And in terms of the top issues, speeding, congestion, and cut-through traffic hit the top marks. And where folks would like us to focus attention, again, are those things: is decreasing vehicular speeds, decreasing cut-through traffic, reducing congestion, and you'll also notice up there is pedestrian improvements. So similar to what we got
Robert.
in the
Robert,
online response. You have a question?
yeah, you just had a couple items highlighted in red. Was that just, they were the largest ones for each one? Is
Those
that
were the
why you
largest
picked them?
ones. And then, so with regards to the listening sessions and the interactive maps, top corridors are listed on the screen here, with Alameda de las Pulgas, El Camino, Watkins, Stockbridge being mentioned the most. Speeding, again, highest issue. And again, walking, biking, congestion, cut through traffic were all things that resonated with our residents as areas for concern. Unsafe turning, I'll highlight a little later on. And then, so this is just kind of a way to look at what we saw with regards to information on the individual corridors from the listening sessions. And so you'll see that congestion on Alameda de las Pulgas, I think we're all familiar with the issue there. El Camino Real, there's some comments about congestion, but there's a great deal of concern about speeding, and then safety for walking and biking on El Camino. Stockbridge, not much on congestion, but you'll see that cut through traffic is something that's highlighted there, in addition to speeding.
Robert, was there any attempt to normalize these for, I think about it, I look at, like, Watkins is third on the list, but it's a fairly short street compared to Alameda de los Pulgas. Same thing with Middlefield, relative terms, the length of Middlefield that goes through Atherton is probably pretty small compared to Atherton Avenue or Alameda de los Pulgas. So, but this is just raw numbers, right?
These are just raw numbers, and I don't think that we're necessarily normalizing, but as we move forward, there are some areas of feedback that we're going to ask of you and ask of our council and ask of our residents in terms of prioritizing where we focus. And again, these are just listed as top streets that we got comments on. We did get a lot of comments on individual neighborhood streets, but they were more one-off comments. So you'll have maybe 2 or 3 people that mentioned a street, but these are the ones that are mentioned most. And honestly, it's because that's the streets that most of the people drive on. So this here is aggregated in terms of the responses for the top 10 streets with the corridor concern. So this takes into account that combination of the feedback from the online surveys integrated with the map comments and the feedback that we got from the listening sessions. As you know, in participating in those events, we didn't restrict people from giving us just one location and one concern. And so it shows that on the right-hand side of the screen where we look at where folks have their highest areas of concern, speeding is the top concern. That's followed by certain corridors where there's a desire for improvements with walking and biking, concerns about congestion and cut through traffic, and again, some of those unsafe turning movements. So this is a graphic that kind of shows where those concerns are. And what you'll see is on those major routes, you'll have the multiple concerns. And so, for example, on Alameda de los Pulgas, speeding, congestion, cut through traffic, those are highlighted on Alameda. And what that does is you'll see the yellow dots are where it indicates unsafe turning. And those yellow dots predominantly are on major routes because it's difficult for folks to make turns either onto or off of because of the amount of traffic. And so you have it on Alameda de los Pulgas, Atherton Avenue, Polimas, somebody noted Fletcher, and then there's Walsh Road. On Valparaiso, on Park Lane, Elena and Emily, and then El Camino, most of the side streets, and then you have Middlefield Road, the same thing. And so, as you know, due to congestion on Middlefield and on El Camino, it's difficult to make those left turn movements and to get in and out of the neighborhoods.
Hey, Robert, I obviously, thanks for this map. I take back what I said about Middlefield being shorter compared to Alameda. I would have thought Alameda looked longer until I saw this. But one question, it strikes me on the data, and it's a qualitative question really. Camino El Lago, fairly small street relative to the number of complaints. And is there, I'm just wondering how much of that is related to the issue with the school, right? If we didn't have the school there and that issue of people coming in and out of there, would this number have been as big? Obviously there's speeding was their number one concern, but I'm just wondering about that.
Okay, I'm gonna try and go back a slide. And
Sure.
so what you'll see here is that in terms of relative comparison, in terms of the number of comments that we received, even though it's in the top 10, it is pretty far down on that list. And we didn't dissect the information, but the comments where we get you know, we have speeding, you have some comment for limited, I'm not really sure about the limited sight distance and visibility. That's probably as you transition
I'm gonna guess.
from going from the school down into Atherton.
I'm gonna guess it's that triangular island in the middle of Camino al Lago you have to work your way around, which is difficult to see around at times.
And so, like I said, we do need to dissect a little further in terms of the details on the comments. But as I look at the comments on Camino, it's really small in comparison to the other streets.
I would also guess, Robert, that the cut-through concern as listed in that area is to Joe's point, folks coming north on Alameda and trying to avoid the congestion at Atherton Avenue and Alameda by cutting to the east and going through, and then exactly right where your cursor is.
Yeah, so
picking one of those three.
we did get a few comments about cut through on Fairview and I think it was at Mira Vista and I forgot the other one.
Stevenson, I think.
But
Linda
we
Vista.
also
Linda
have,
Vista.
Linda Vista, that's right.
um,
But that cut through, by the definition of cut through there, is, I think, slightly different, I'm just guessing, than the definition of cut through coming down Stockbridge or Atherton Avenue.
okay, I'm gonna say yes, but I'm gonna qualify that, is that we didn't necessarily define the terms when people were filling out the surveys and marking it up.
Right. Yeah, totally agree.
And so this, we all, I think we can collectively understand, and we've received complaints about it, is that when traffic backs up, people are trying to find the alternate route and either going down Camino al Lago in the northbound direction, coming down Camino al Lago, cutting across Fairview and going up, or alternatively, if folks are coming up Atherton Avenue, they're going southbound, they might cut across Fairview to get to Alameda and avoid the stop sign.
Right. Agree. And I never realized it wasn't segregated, but were defined differently. But I think the cut through that I, as a Stockbridge resident, am more concerned about are the folks that I've followed off of 280 that take me all the way down to El Camino. And I think they're headed to, I don't know, 101 or something. But
yeah, and ideally the folks that are coming off of 280 stay down Woodside Road to get down to El Camino.
correct.
So less cut through in Lindenwood neighborhood as would be expected.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I'm not quite sure why there's comments of cut through on Glenwood and Encinal, but we received a couple of those comments as well. These are likely a result of avoidance of the marsh signal.
I'm sorry, Robert, could you clarify that? You said you're surprised by comments about cut through on Glenwood?
Well, I'm going to say I'm not there. The traffic on Glenwood is likely more the El Camino to Middlefield. And so it is a direct route. So when you say, with the cut through there, I guess by my classic definition of looking at the stuff near Fairview and the comments that people would be doing to avoid signalized intersections, this doesn't really.
It's
You
the
just
same.
mean it's more of an artery anyway. It's meant to be it's an artery.
It's
so
more
not
of an
cut
artery,
through.
yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
Valparaiso. It's a continuation of Valparaiso. So it's like Stockbridge. It's way across town.
Okay. So our consultant is continuing to analyze the data, and we have a subscription to a software called Streetlight that you can look at actual traffic patterns based on data from that they collect from cell phone pings. And so they're doing that now, kind of looking at the traffic patterns to align it with the data that we got from the residents. So our next steps, we're analyzing the input versus traffic patterns now. Go ahead. Okay, we're going to be developing some recommendations and alternatives for input. We're going to be working to develop a new online survey to ask our residents further questions and get feedback on potential devices and prioritization of areas. And we'll hold another series of public workshops. And we really want to get feedback on, some of the key questions, their interest in reducing congestion on main routes to reduce cut-through traffic versus the alternative in terms of trying to slow traffic down to discourage traffic, but that may generate additional cut-through traffic. And so there's kind of that balance in terms of where we want to try and focus and put things in, understanding that there are trade-offs to anything that we do. Asking again where we should prioritize traffic calming measures, the type of measures of interest and where they might be located. There's the desire for improving pedestrian and bicycle facilities. There's a question as to, in our desire to maintain our semi-rural nature in town, what should those improvements look like and where should they be located? We do have our bicycle and pedestrian master plan that outlines some of these things, but getting feedback from our residents in terms of what they look like are things that we are certainly interested in.
Hey, Robert, if I could, apologies. A common complaint is speeding, and I've heard the chief and Sergeant Kokler a number of times say that every time we test for speeding, we find that there's a misperception. Not every time, I'm exaggerating, but the vast majority of times, people perceive traffic to be moving much more quickly than it actually is. Do we have any way to check that? I mean, if people are perceiving speeding as a problem, but if we go out and test and everybody's following the speed limit, that seems to lead us to a different place, and if that's not the case.
Yeah, so we have a couple of means that we are testing that, and I think the committee has been receiving some radar results for the recorder that was put out on Middlefield recently. Following the concerns on Stockbridge, we did put out PD put out the radar recorder on Stockbridge to get actual data as to how many cars are driving on the street, how fast they're going, what the average speed is. And it actually further analyzes if you're looking at a particular minimum speed for enforcement, what are the best times to go out there? And so PD uses that data to identify the best times for enforcement, and I can have Sergeant Metzger respond how they use that and how they go out for enforcement and assign
from my standpoint, the issue would be, I'd be more interested to hear whether the perception of speeding on these streets is accurate or not. I'd hate for us to solve a problem that's not real.
Yeah, no, and I think that what we are doing is we are collecting data on these routes, and I'm going to say that we actually will have the ability through our Streets Light subscription to look at some data pre-COVID versus post-COVID, or in our current climate, which is a little different, but I think we're all noticing a slow uptick in traffic these days as people are getting back to work and the restrictions loosen up a little bit. And so, I mean, I've noticed it in my commute that things are picking up slowly as we move through time. So I don't know that it'll get back quite to where it was before, but it is ticking up.
So maybe we can share when there's more data for comparison, we can share it with the town residents. So they, I assume when you go out and speak with them after their complaints, you show them the data that like, well, yes, there's some speeding, but it's not egregious or whatever.
But that is the problem, right? Because you run the test and when you talk to people, I don't think it's everybody saying, oh, the average speed is too high. And so if you sit there and say, on Glenwood, the speed limit's 25 and the average speed is 29, and is that acceptable? And you go, the problem is not. It's the 1 out of 100 driver who goes 45 down the street, right?
Yeah.
And that's what everybody worries about. And for some people, that's why the calming measures are important. It's like, we're not trying to slow down the average isn't too bad, but you want to stop, the people who just don't think of it as a residential neighborhood and think of it as El Camino Real, right?
Yeah, no, and that's true. And I think that what we will try and do is, to the degree that we can, collect some of that data and try and share it through that public workshop, and continue to collect data and try and share it as well.
Robert, so
Yes.
I'm interested in the page that maybe is coming next, but maybe it's not. I'm interested in the steps after the next step. So can you paint a picture of what you perceive to be the reality of the macro view? At some point, we have to stop trying to gather data. And at some point, we have to determine, is there an actionable plan and what does that look like? And then we have to decide what action is and then do it. So I'm interested in knowing what your reality tells us that looks like.
Okay, so as we go through the next outreach process, the desire is to get feedback on what measures are acceptable and where from our residents, and to get some input on prioritization so that we can put together that what we're calling our neighborhood traffic management action plan. So we are looking to develop a document that outlines measures, locations, and prioritization.
By when?
I will say that it will be the spring of next year, probably.
And would you see that, just again, so I can understand, is that going to come to this committee to make some recommendations and decisions to the council, or is it going straight to the council to make some choices? What's our role in that process?
Well, as I am doing now, I'm sharing the information that we gathered, and I'm going to ask you some questions as we move forward through the presentation, like 2 slides from now. But we're going to come to you with the feedback that we got or that we get in the next round to get your take on the data and recommendations so that we can move them forward to the council.
Great, thank you.
So this here is
If I could on that, I'm sorry, just
response
to
routes.
interrupt, Robert.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make the point that from my standpoint, at least, I think it's very important that this committee plays a key role, and I'll be working hard to make sure this committee's, part of the process and nothing goes straight to the council without getting feedback from this committee.
Great.
No, and I think that, as I said, our intent is after we gather that last round of public input that we try and put together that plan and bring the draft with questions and areas for input for the committee to help guide it before it goes to council. So this is the Menlo Fire's primary response routes. And we will, as we develop the action plan and work through areas that we would be potentially putting in traffic management measures, we will have to have a conversation with Menlo Fire, particularly if they're going to be on the response routes, making sure that they're designed to minimize impacts to their apparatus and response times. So as we move forward, I want to get from you any input and suggestions that you have with regards to questions that we should be asking, whether it's through online surveys or in the public workshops, so that we can be sure to include them in some fashion to gather input. And so I've put down in some other areas where I'd like to get your thoughts as we move forward, in terms of your thoughts on reducing congestion on main routes to reduce cut through versus slowing traffic on the main routes to discourage traffic, which might generate some cut through, and which streets, you might have one opinion on one street versus another street, where we should prioritize some traffic calming measures, if you have any thoughts on that, given some of the data that you saw, measures that might be acceptable or unacceptable, and your thoughts on bike and pedestrian facilities.
When
And
do you want them
so-
by?
What's that?
When do you want those thoughts by?
Well, if you have anything to share with me today,
I personally would prefer to take some time and actually be quite thoughtful of what I would write to you, because yes, I could give you some off the cuffs now,
okay.
but I'd like to take some time. So, in how long a period of time you want them, I'll lay them out very clearly.
Well, I'll take them as I can get them. If there's any
Okay.
input that I can get today, I'd like to be able to share it with the council, even if it's just high level thoughts.
Could you send us this deck? Are we able to get this deck? That would be helpful.
Sure.
That would be very helpful. I personally would like it. Thank you.
No, happy to share it. I think we're probably also going to be putting it on the project website as well. And so we were planning to give a similar update to the council at their next meeting, which is next week. And so that's why I was asking if there's any high-level thoughts that you want to share.
Robert, one
And,
thing that I'd like to get some input on, you're kind of assuming that people do want to have traffic calming measures here, because there's some controversy about that. Like, do we want to do anything? Is one question I'd have. Are we open to traffic calming measures? Are we open to reducing congestion on main routes by using different measures? Whatever the option, because when last we spoke about this, there were a lot of people who just said, no, we shouldn't do anything. And that's, to me, sort of a gating issue. Should we even look at these issues?
Yeah, and so that's what I was saying, is that there may be a differential between what's acceptable on a main route and what's acceptable on a local street. And I'm going to say that there are some people that believe that certain streets are main routes and others that live on them that says that they're not.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Let's pull back. I'm sorry. My point is that I think we have some people who don't want to do, and who say we should not be doing anything to influence where traffic goes. And there's a threshold question there. Should we? Should we be open to traffic calming? Should we be open to directing traffic away from neighborhood streets? I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that. Because if people aren't open to it, there's no point to having the rest of the conversation, really.
So I'm
Yeah,
open. I'll give you mine. I'm open to it, but there are some very specific things within there that I would, in fact, be opposed to. How about that as a compromise? So we should modify traffic flow and direct it. And I personally believe, and until I see the evidence, and I haven't seen significant of it, and you raised the point earlier, Joe, is people's perception versus the reality of speeding means that's a really important piece. I personally would not be putting in traffic calming measures within residential streets for a variety of reasons, and the trade-off for Menlo Fire is a key one. So
You mentioned certain things that you wouldn't want to consider.
that would be one of them. Traffic, as you would broadly define it, traffic calming. That would be one that I don't think that there's enough evidence, and I'm happy to see it, that would support that measure. What I would do, and there are certain streets that I would literally close off that are cut throughs. And the cut through on that traffic is not Atherton residents who are cutting through, it's others. So if we go back to Camino Largo, that cut through is, I would have to guess, significant number of those are in fact Atherton residents who are avoiding the issue at the what could be a roundabout that isn't at Atherton Avenue, as opposed to those who may be cutting through on Stockbridge or Selby. And Stockbridge is Alameda traffic that's cutting through, and Selby is Woodside Road traffic that's cutting through. There's virtually no Atherton resident who is cutting through on those. That's external. I would stop that, simply put. And there are some very easy ways to do that. And the only people it's going to inconvenience is the people who are cutting through, not an Atherton resident. So, I mean, I'll write all that down for you in a very detailed way, including other pieces in here, but you wanted some feedback, so that's mine.
Yeah, no, certainly.
So I'll take a little contrarian to Steve, agree on some things and others. I for one, am absolutely, totally in favor of looking at different things to do. I have no problem with traffic calming measures. My comment to you, Steve, is the challenge of doing something like you suggest is you say it won't inconvenience anyone who's live here. If you decide you're going to block a cut through street, then you're going to get a lot more traffic on the arterial streets, which are already congested. And the people that live on those streets are not going to be happy at all. And their Atherton residents are going to be really upset. So I don't think you can say you're only upsetting the people that are cutting through because you're moving traffic to other places. So everything has unintended consequences, and we have to look at those. So that's
if there was a perfect solution, we'd already have done it. So it's what's better for the greater good, so to speak, is really the answer. Some people will be absolutely inconvenienced. There's no question. By not doing anything, though, we are in fact inconveniencing more people than what we would if we took a very specific measure, irregardless of what that measure is. So I think it's incumbent upon this committee and the council and Atherton to actually take action and do something, whatever that something is. And there will be unhappy people, and we should live with the consequences of those unhappy people and make sure we understand what those things are. I would absolutely be opposed to doing nothing.
Yeah.
Vehemently opposed to doing nothing.
Yeah, I don't believe, I mean, for one, there's no way we can stop the traffic. I mean, we are the victims of what is around us. And so that's why I'm kind of, I lean toward traffic calming, because I don't think we can stop people from coming through. We can't stop them. I don't think we probably get a lot of support to say we're going to figure out a way to keep people from going through Atherton. Do we want to become Pebble Beach and say you're not allowed to drive through Atherton unless you pay? And so to me, the idea is if we find out we have dangerous situations, how do we slow it down? I don't frankly see us moving off. So that's my opinion on that one, Mike. You asked about it. I'd be supportive of looking at it. The one thing I'm struggling with Robert, you asking for advice, I think the missing piece that I can't make a decision on is the data on how people are driving. And we're in the process of collecting that, as you said, with radar machines out on these roads. Without seeing that data, without looking at it, you've got some data here that shows kind of average speed. Without seeing, what does the bell curve look like where we've got people going, 50 miles an hour on Middlefield? How much of that? It's hard to say whether, I'm willing to say we should do something to slow this down. The other one, which I'm very frustrated, it happened for a while, and it's you kind of just went through it really fast, and I waited to back up to it. The fire one, I just really struggle with. We kind of accept that the fire department has dictated this, and tough luck, we have to live with it. They're part of the community. If we say there's reasons why some of these streets have to be slowed down, I mean, we've got to come to a compromise. We can't just say the fire department gets to choose.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, and I always say that, Carol, because this has come up before, and the answer has been, nope, can't talk to the fire department. That's their call. And I'm like, why? So.
Sounds reasonable to me. I think we should also give, I mean, when you're done, we should give Tom a chance to speak up.
Yeah, I'm done.
Oh, no worries. I'm listening. I think, though, that the point about the reality of the speeds versus the perception is a good one. And I think that speaks to the outreach process, but also in terms of what are the calming measures and what should we do about it, because it helps us define what it is we're trying to solve for. I felt like speeds were pretty high on Stockbridge. The police department brought out the black box, and I learned a lot in that process. And I think that conveying that information of perception versus reality is key to the public, but also key to how we go about trying to solve what it is we're trying to solve for. I think speed is one of the issues. Capacity or congestion is the other issue that we want to look at. So again, I'm a Stockbridge resident. Steve is a Selby Lane resident, and we've got different issues than Watkins. Watkins just surprises me why that little strip has got so many problems. I mean, other than Waze always tries to send me that direction. But in terms of traffic calming or whatnot, I'm open to the discussion to come up with whatever as Steve put it, the greatest good would be. I just think we need real clarity on what it is we're trying to solve for.
Thank you. Can I make a couple comments? I think the outreach, I would suggest if we decide to do more with the public, obviously the online survey was very successful because you had a lot more responses that way. So if we do want to get more information, I would recommend that one. I do think, traffic calming to me is a I don't know if I want to say a red flag, but I guess it would be limited to just places where there is a lot of traffic. I'm afraid, stop signs have been put in little tiny places that didn't need traffic calming just because one person complained in the past.
Yeah, so I think
I would
that
like
one of
to,
the things that we're going to have to do is kind of go through the different types of measures and what the pluses and minuses of those are.
yeah,
And so I don't know that we were necessarily, to your comment, Carol, talking about stop signs per se,
yeah,
but I think we did talk at a previous meeting about potentially restricting left turns during certain hours to discourage folks from going certain routes. There are a number of types of devices, and one of the things that we will likely consider is whether or not we should put in temporary stuff to test out rather than permanent fixtures. And so we can, as part of that action plan, develop a process for, certain test measures that we put out for a certain period of time to see whether or not they're effective.
sounds reasonable. I guess I go towards probably what is most important in my book is truly safety. Because traffic is traffic, it's everywhere. There's going to be cut through traffic everywhere. So it's mostly an issue of making it flow better and safety, which also obviously includes pedestrians and bicycles. So to me, that should be our main goal, is safety, not just keeping a few people happy or a smaller group happy. I don't know. Anyway, that's it. Does anybody else have some more comments they'd like to add?
Carol, Chief McCulley, if I could just make a couple comments.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to Councilmember Lemper's question, and it's a good one, about perception versus reality. And my experience has been over my career is that the perception is that the speeds are at high volume, but when you do go out and do studies like we've done, and we've been feeding you that information, we'll continue to do it, it typically comes back that the speed is not fast. It's typically within acceptable range. And then also at that time, you have to analyze, what are we trying to calm then? What are we trying to calm with traffic? And we also look at, and you've heard it from me before, you'll hear it again, when you look at the collision picture that we report every month and annually for the number of miles driven, our collision picture is extremely low. And for those collisions that were actually caused by speed, again, are extremely low. It's driver error, it's falling too close, it's inattention. And so those are the things that we're looking at. And I think one thing that might help, knowing that you're all busy, and I think Tom did it recently, and I would invite Tom to come out again, and all of you, is to come out with our officers for the morning commute and the afternoon commute and take a look at your perception of the speed versus what the radar equipment is telling us, and kind of how we work, and kind of get feedback from the officers about traffic calming, and then restricting cut through traffic. And I've been asked this before. It would be impossible for us. There's no way I can start pulling people over and asking them, are you an Atherton resident or where are you going? To restrict the cut through traffic, I'm not sure what that solution would be. Enforcement is not a solution to that. It's not possible.
I'm up for that, Chief, so I will contact you separately. That would be very, very informative for me.
Yeah, and I'll send out an invite to you. As you know, we're open 24 hours a day, but really that morning commute or afternoon, or taking a look at both, I think would really be educational for you. And I think the feedback the officers are getting from you, from your perspective, would actually help them as well.
Well, I do feel like we have a very safe town, so yeah, I will take you up on the ride along.
Chief, one issue that came, I'm sorry, Carol, if I could just, one issue that comes up when you talk about safety in town is over the last, say, 8 years, I think we've had 4 deaths, either in Atherton or within 15 feet of Atherton, and they've all been on El Camino.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how we plug that into the system, but we do. I know it's a state highway, but we have the ability to influence that in some ways. And I want to make sure that we don't just throw up our hands and say, well, that's El Camino, we can't do anything. Because if you look at safety, that screams the most dangerous by far in town.
Yeah, and we definitely don't throw up our hands. 3 of those were on El Camino, and they were all pedestrians, very similar circumstances, especially the first one, or this latest one, the tragic one on ECR at Watkins. And we did have one years ago on Watkins at Millfield that was a broadside. So, you know, we're fortunate, again, that our fatality picture, even our serious injury collision picture, is very low. We don't take that and say, well, we have no problem, we're not going to do anything. We're out there. The 3 fatalities on ECR with the transient pedestrians and other pedestrians, those are difficult to prevent. You know, those were all error on part of the pedestrian, unfortunately, and then error on the driver at Watkins and Middlefield. But we do pay attention to that.
Yeah, and by the way, Chief, that was not in any way a criticism of you. I didn't mean to even imply that. That's not.
Oh no, not at all.
Okay.
We totally understand that, and we, you know, when somebody dies in our town, believe me, we take it all very personal, you know, very serious. In this latest one, we talked at length and met with the driver who killed the gentleman, who was just, you know, she's just falling apart over it, and then dealing with the pedestrian sister, the same thing. So we take it serious. We take a look at it, and we're out there, you know, in the hot spots where we can be.
I'm going to follow up on that and ask what you think about this question with regards to El Camino. I mean, one of the issues there is that there aren't really any safe walking or biking places along El Camino. And would you think it a good idea to ask in one of the surveys on El Camino, would you be willing, this isn't properly phrased, but basically, are you willing to consider the trade-off of losing a lane on El Camino to provide for biking and pet facilities?
Asking for initial feedback now?
Just on not asking your answer to the question, but whether or not the question should be asked.
My answer dictates the first one, so.
Because it is possible to do that? It is a possibility?
It is a possibility. And if you look at, for example, just south of us in Menlo Park, it's 2 lanes in each direction. Through the majority of Redwood City, it's 2 lanes in each direction. Mm-hmm. And what we get is, as we go from 3 lanes down to 2 lanes, you get a bottleneck. And when we go from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, we get speeders.
Yeah.
So it's a question not intended to get your input at this point in time as to whether or not it's a good idea, but it is an area that we can certainly ask our residents what their thoughts are.
And I'm sorry, Robert, and the question is, do we want to limit it to 2 lanes to?
No, do we
make
want to
it
ask
safer
the
to have?
question as to our residents' impression on whether or not we should keep it at 3 lanes with little to no pedestrian bike facilities versus what we actually have in our bike and ped master plan, which is to put in bike and ped facilities. But to do that, you would ultimately have to lose a lane in each direction.
I would say just be careful what you ask, because if you ask people who do not have the full array of information, you're going to get an answer that you didn't want to hear. So
Okay.
that's my opinion.
I would second that. I don't think as phrased, and I realize you prefaced that, but I don't think as phrased you're asking the right question to solve for that answer. So no, I mean, as phrased, I wouldn't do it, but I would also be cautious to Steve's point of getting more data or wrong answers based on minimal data.
Yeah, I concur. I've been to the Menlo Park City Council meetings where this topic's come up, and you get just the hardcore bikers who are willing to sacrifice anything to get bike lanes on El Camino, and I don't care what the traffic is like and how slow it goes, and so you get the passionate following who can kind of skew things. So you have to. I think you're right. You can ask the question, but be careful how you ask it.
Okay.
It's an easy.
You should also be aware there's a larger regional. I'm sorry. There's a larger regional approach to El Camino that's called the Grand Boulevard Initiative, where they're talking about going from Daly City to I don't know where, somewhere far south of us, and making it a sort of pedestrian-friendly, outdoor restaurant-y 2 lanes in each direction road with wide sidewalks and stuff like that. That's beyond anything Atherton's looking at, obviously, but that's just so you know, there's a regional group looking at that now. They've been looking at it for at least 10 years, and maybe there's another 30 to go. I'm not sure, but they are looking at it.
I think that makes sense for cities that are side by side that have commerce, but we don't, right? So all along the city border on the west side of El Camino would be what, a big green belt? I mean, as a cyclist who rides to and commutes to and from either Redwood City or Menlo Park train station, it's hell on the El Camino side. But taking a lane, to remove the lane of El Camino to solve for that isn't going to fix things in the Redwood City side or the Menlo Park side at first glance. So I don't think that's the right approach.
I can't think of a more romantic date than sitting at a sidewalk cafe on El Camino Real for dinner.
I'd get nervous sitting on Santa Cruz Avenue. I mean, I wouldn't do it.
Didn't somebody just get hit on Santa Cruz? An elderly woman just got hit? Yeah, any event, yeah.
Quite possibly, Mike.
Anything else there for the traffic management action plan?
All right, well, thank you. Appreciate the time, and we will be coming back to you. And to your request, we will be I will have the PowerPoint sent out to you, and we will be I'll be open to getting whatever feedback you would like to provide, so that we can use that as we start developing our online questionnaire and other things for public input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we move on to staff reports. Sergeant Kokler, you're up.
Yeah, so the staff reports were sent to you. Does anybody have any questions about either one of them, September or October?
No.
Nope. Is this when we would ask questions about all the documents that the chief sent us?
And are you referring to our traffic report?
I'll All the surveys, you sent us a lot. Collisions.
Yeah, I sent you a lot of information, and something that we probably should have been sending all along, and we'll continue to do that. And again, most of the surveys are showing that the speeds are well within acceptable ranges. Now on Middlefield, and I sent you some discussion, some comments on that, we did see an uptick on the northern portion, and when we see that, we open up a traffic speed complaint that directs officers there at particular times, and then we'll get the results, and we're doing that during the month of November. And then Sergeant Kokler is moving our famous black box to 2 other locations on Middlefield, so we can get a really good feel and analysis for the speed along the corridor, and then based on those results, we'll further direct some targeted enforcement.
May I ask a question about the streets surveyed for radar, that last one that you sent? What?
On Middlefield?
No, just it's all the streets, lots of streets are listed, speed, survey date, survey due, critical.
Oh, I
Yes,
can.
so that's,
I can
ahead, Anthony.
respond to what that is. I don't
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me, but I can say that we have to do an engineering and traffic survey to assess the speeds on the different streets for us to set the speed limits. And so we conduct the study, and what is listed as the critical speed is the 85th percentile, and state law dictates how that is to be used in setting the speed limit. And so there's limited flexibility in terms of how you round it and any adjustments that you make. So if, for example, your critical speed is 40 miles an hour, you can't arbitrarily reduce it down to 25 and have it enforced with radar.
Okay.
And so I believe the table that you have are what the current speed limits are on those streets, when they were last surveyed, and when they need to be surveyed next, as
Okay.
well as what the critical speed is on those streets.
So here's a question, just kind of an aside, but the speed limit was reduced on Valparaiso recently. Did that actually was justified by this? Because the speed limit was 35, I thought.
It was, and it's been the speed survey that was done, or the engineering traffic survey that was done that we are using, was actually done by Menlo Park.
Mm-hmm.
And they did 2 locations, and we coordinated with them because we were going to counsel with revalidating some of ours, and we were able to use their data. And so as as a collective, the 2 of us are going to be reducing the speed down to 30 miles an hour. So it's a 30 mile an hour speed limit in both directions. We only have one side of the road.
Carol, as I pointed out there, if we didn't do that, the speed limit going
One
west
direction.
would be 35 miles an hour and going east would be 30 miles an hour, which would be kind of strange.
Yes. Yeah, I figured it was just a reasonable thing, but
Yeah.
I was just wondering if the data showed it needed to be reduced. But anyway, okay. Thank you. Thanks for explaining the document.
Sure.
Does anybody else have questions about documents that were sent?
And I believe we have September and October, our normal traffic reports. Again, we can go through those in detail. If you have any particular questions, I review them. I didn't see any anomalies. And again, for the amount of traffic we have, you may have seen 1 or 2 traffic complaints there. We're fortunate that we don't get a lot of those, but when we do, and I think Tom mentioned, the closing the communication loop, we do put that out. We contact the complainant and get their input. We go out and do our work, and then we definitely follow back up with them so they know exactly what we did, and then exactly what the speed surveys were showing. And we usually get a really good feedback from residents on that.
I think you realize they're heard then. That's important.
Chief, where do we give written warnings on speed and where do we give citations? Is there some rule of thumb?
Well, there's no rule of thumb other than, and my officers know this, and it's the way I was raised in this profession, is that we always try to do the lowest possible, and often just the verbal warning or our written warnings. There's not a lot of agencies around that have a written warning for speed, and you might go, well, what's the purpose of that? And what's good about that and the verbal warnings is, people think they're going to get a ticket. You walk up there with a ticket book and you got a warning. They're usually very appreciative, obviously. And then we put that into our system and say we stop them a month later and say, hey, you just got a warning for speed, a month ago. Then that precipitates, getting a citation. And the officers know, it's not about obviously revenue. It's not about numbers. It's not about tickets. They have the full discretion, and they know my expectations are the lowest possible education. And when the time and the place is there for the ticket, because we don't think education is going to work, then they'll issue a citation for the speed.
Thanks for explaining that.
Chief, there's also, is there a threshold as well? I mean, Bill Widmer obviously asked very often for the team to come outside here next door where I live and check, and I've gone out and sat with the officers a couple times. They've always said there's a window above the, 5 miles an hour, within 5 mile an hour above the speed limit. Worst case, that you maybe not even do anything, but they just give the warning. You start to get a little bit above it, then it gets to, you're on the verge of, are you getting a warning? Or are you getting an actual ticket?
Yeah, everyone always, I've been asked that, at parties and everything else for years, what can I do? And typically within, the 10-mile range, and depending on the situation, it's like, okay, you need to slow it down. But when you get beyond that, that's where you're probably going to get a citation, because you're dealing with human reaction time to see something, hit that brake and stopping distance. And that's why speed limits, and especially in the school zones, are set to reduce that stopping distance. So if there is an impact with a child or a pedestrian, you're reducing those injuries.
Any other staff report comments? We can move on to the future agenda items. I see it says Middlefield Road.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why you're getting some of that data from the chief with regards to the speeds on Middlefield. When the council met last and adopted the speed limits on the various streets, and they were they had some concerns about the speeds on Middlefield, and at this point in time, based on the data that we have, we can't reduce the speed on Middlefield. However, they are asking us, and in working with you, on maybe some measures that can be done in the interim to start to slow people down, so that eventually we can reduce that speed limit. And so it's not an item for discussion tonight. It will be at your next meeting. And so it's really on here listed as to put the seed in your mind to start thinking about Middlefield Road.
And it sounds like the council's goal is to reduce the speed limit, and that we are supposed to help them get to that.
I think the concern was safety on Middlefield, and there was one council member in particular who was very concerned about the speed of traffic on Middlefield Road. But I think the idea is do the right thing, Carol, not try to get any specific result.
Thank you.
And Carol, I think one additional thing, and totally the committee's decision to put it on the agenda, we had the gentleman on Stockbridge, and I think Tom brought this up too, who was inquiring about the possibility of the installation of a crosswalk. And then Robert and I met with this resident, and he came for you at a meeting previous. And so that may be something to close the loop with him, if you want to put that on the agenda or not, and leave it as is.
I'm sorry, where was the crosswalk request? Was that?
On Alameda at Stockbridge.
Oh, right. Okay, I Not sure. How should we proceed with that request? Robert, can you advise us, or is that something we should?
Well, I'm going to say that normally we don't like to put in uncontrolled crosswalks on major streets. That being said, we are going through the process on the neighborhood traffic management plan, and it can, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the intersections that was on that map where concerns were raised. We can, if you would like to have a discussion at one of your upcoming meetings, or if you want to defer that to be considered through the neighborhood traffic management action plan, you can do that as well.
If I'll agree, I think that sounds fine to put it in to the neighborhood traffic plan. That sounds reasonable.
I agree.
And make sure we bring it up. Okay.
And Carol, can I also right here just let you know, this is an opportunity for committee members to raise any issues they want to discuss at the next meeting. That's one of the purposes to have this on the agenda. Just so y'all know, don't feel super limited.
I did hear the roundabout word come up earlier. Is that something that wants to be discussed or put in part of the neighborhood plan?
I think you're on mute.
Discuss. Yes. Huge advocate. Master.
Should would it be included in the neighborhood plan because that is a traffic management issue, isn't it?
It's bigger than a traffic management issue.
I'm sorry for laughing, Steve. It's just, this was an issue before you were on the committee that would come up regularly. And so I've always been a fan of traffic circles, so I'm not against the idea at all.
I grew up with them, so I know how they work when they work well.
We are starting to see them. Would we like to discuss it as a separate agenda item then? Is that what I'm asking? What I should ask?
I mean, according to, based on Joe's comments, we don't need to go over old ground if there's nowhere to go. But I personally would love to have a discussion about it and see if the timing is now right for something to be done specifically at that intersection. So I would like to have it as a separate item of discussion, but willing to not have it if everybody said, no, we've been there and done that. There's no, we don't need to go.
Yeah, I don't want to waste the committee's time either, but I'd be interested in learning from the collective wisdom of the group that have been through it.
Yeah, I mean, the main argument, I mean, Gary Lauder is a very big fan of traffic circles and really pushed for it. And the big issue is the challenge we always had is they take a lot of real estate. And in the places we want to put them, there wasn't the real estate to do it without eminent domain. And you're not getting a lot of support in Atherton Council to take people's private property to do a traffic circle. And when we did the traffic studies and they considered putting in kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, of the smaller version of traffic circles that are kind of mini traffic circles, you can barely get in there. They weren't any better than kind of four-way stops, and because of how congested they could get. And so it was like nobody's against the idea, but trying to figure out a way to fit them into the intersections where we have problems was really challenging just because of space. Is that probably fair, Robert?
I can say that the information that I had coming on board was your standard traffic circle that you would put for the type of traffic that we have takes too much real estate. The previous chair was pushing for a study on a mini roundabout, but that wasn't approved.
And at Atherton Avenue specifically, let's leave aside all the others. At Atherton Avenue, you're telling me there's not enough real estate without eminent domain? I'm surprised at that, based on what I see at that intersection every time I go on it. So,
happy to have a conversation offline if you want, with regards to how much property is out there.
But the short answer is yes, Steve. I think Joe nailed it pretty well with his summary. And we're talking about, just so I'm clear, we're talking about Atherton and Alameda Los Polvos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the intersection. And it wasn't a lot of space, but there was, they couldn't do it without eminent domain was the feedback we got anyway.
And the smaller circle was not approved by whom? What group? Just the,
We weren't authorized to move forward, and the council didn't authorize an
Okay.
additional study on it. So
okay, it sounds like we should not address it then because the council has, it hasn't been that long. It was before I joined. So maybe it's been 4 or 5 years?
It was sooner than that. I think it was just before you joined
Joined,
Carol.
okay.
Last time we considered it. And it had been a lingering issue for a while. It was just brought up and it
Yeah.
was not.
Okay. So it sounds like we do not have the, can't go forward with it, basically. It'd be a waste of time.
Mike, you probably got the most continuity here and been through it all. I mean,
Yeah,
your judgment.
I mean, I think what everybody's saying is accurate. I don't know whether, I wouldn't say that the council would be bitter if it was brought up or anything like that. So I'm hesitant to say if you think it's the right thing to do, not to look at it. But you should know there's probably a thumb on the scale from the council standpoint because they had looked at it and decided not to proceed. I can't recall, Robert, I'd love to hear, what was the reason for not pursuing the smaller traffic circle study?
Effectiveness.
I think it was, like I say, from what I recall, it was a variety of things, including the overall study of Alameda de las Pulgas and I'm going to say that was the primary intersection along that route that was of concern, but there was a shift from looking at the major streets to doing this effort on the neighborhood side and getting input from the residents as to where their priorities are.
What I recall was we had the analysis of the traffic at that intersection, and they had done the consulting firm had done an analysis that said, if you were to change this to a traffic light, if you were to change it to this and that, here's what the traffic flow could be. And when that data came back, the traffic, and they said, look, we don't have room there to do a full, Stanford version of a traffic circle they've done at Stanford. It's got to be the smaller one. And when their data analysis came back and said, and if you put in the smaller traffic circle, here's the traffic flow, and the traffic flow was no better than a 4-way stop. And I think at that point, Gary said, that's ridiculous, that something's wrong with that can't be. And so it was like kind of stuck at that point of like, well, we've had the consulting firm do this, but you're questioning it, do we do something else? And that was where it got stuck, was like, look, we've already paid the firm to do it. They came back with this. I'm not sure we're willing to commit to do something else. At least that's kind of where it ended.
I think that's right. You're ringing a bell with me now, Joe, where my memory is that there were lights around it and stop signs not far away. And during certain hours of the day, the concern was that cars going east-west would not be able to enter into the circle because the flow would be so consistent going north-south that there'd be no cars to get in, and it'd be a less efficient way to get in than controlled.
And when you're constrained to that smaller space, it's a lot harder to get that flow in. Whereas if you've got a bigger circle, even with traffic, there's a way to get in. And yeah, it was complicated.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a good update or backup for all that. Thank you. I guess have we decided to put the Middlefield Road onto the agenda? I'm sorry, going back to that. Did we decide to put that on?
Yeah, I think that we'd like to have that on.
Okay. And any other agenda items? Then we move on to any public comments? No? Next meeting date, January 12th.
Wow. Next year already.
I for one, I'm happy to say goodbye to 2020.
Amen.
Does anybody, I guess, move to, end, do we make a motion to end the meeting?
So motion.
Moved.
Seconded. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good
Good night.
evening.
Good night.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Christmas and New Year. Thank you, Sergeant Metzger. Thanks, Jennifer.
Have a good evening, guys. Take care.
Night.